So welcome everybody. This is going to be a really interesting presentation. I'm excited about the topic. I think you'll be really excited to hear about what's going on at Bristol Bay. And I wanted to introduce someone very special. Her name is Ann Lesk. Ann, you can raise your hand there. Ann is a member of our New Jersey Conservancy Council, and she has a very strong connection to our work in Alaska. Her and her husband are collectors. They collect Inuit and other indigenous northern art, and in 19, listen to me, wow, throwback. In 2019, they hosted an event at their house, which if you look behind her background, you'll see some of the examples of Inuit art that she has, and it's an amazing thing to see. We had a number of colleagues that came to visit and learn more about our Alaska program. Ann is an attorney. She is of counsel with Fried, Frank, Harris, Shriver, and Jacobson, where she chaired the Trusts and Estates Department for almost 20 years, which is pretty cool. And she also serves as the board secretary for the Appalachian Mountain Club. Pretty interesting club. So Ann has been a very big supporter of our Bristol Bay program. So we're really pleased to have her join us. And I'd like to ask Ann if you would like to speak up.
Barbara, thank you. It's I'm in the Alaska corner of the living room, but it's a pleasure to serve on the Conservancy Council for New Jersey and to learn about the breadth of TNC's work. And I'm particularly pleased that TNC New Jersey has joined with TNC Alaska to preserve a really irreplaceable resource. It's a delight to be asked to introduce Steve Cohn, who joined the Nature Conservancy in 2018 as State Director for Alaska. Before joining TNC, he had a distinguished 16-year career with the Federal Bureau of Land Management, where he successfully served as Deputy State Director for Resources in Alaska and in other senior BLM postings in Washington, D.C. and Arizona. Steve holds a bachelor's degree in government from Harvard University and master's and doctoral degrees from the University of California at Berkeley College of Natural Resources. Credentials can be very dry, and Steve is anything but dry. I had the pleasure of hosting a program at which Steve spoke, and you were about to learn about his passion for Alaska and its resources and how vividly he communicates those. He has a great talent for making connections with people. If you consider the constituencies that are affected by the Pebble Mine, you will realize that he has to understand and negotiate with a wide range of interests, from the commercial sponsors of the mine to the Alaska and federal government officials, to the indigenous peoples living around Bristol Bay, to the commercial and sport fisherfolk, and the conservationists. And as you will hear, he has been able to connect with all of them. Sit back and enjoy. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ann. And it's great to see you again. And again, thank you so much for hosting today, and then the beautiful event that you helped host for us in 2019 at your home. Your artwork collection is unparalleled, and it was a real honor to be able to address you and your colleagues and your friends a year and a half ago. And I'm very happy and privileged to be able to talk again today in a little more detail about some of the work that we did talk about at your home, but in much greater depth here, specifically our work in Bristol Bay. And Barbara, I want to thank you as well for hosting this event, for being such a great supporter of the Alaska chapter of TNC, and really being a champion for the idea of one conservancy, that we might work in disparate chapters literally spread around the world, but in the end we have one mission and one goal of a world where people and nature thrive together. And it's,
You're very welcome, Steve.
yeah, so thank you. Thank you again for hosting us, and thank you for your team. And they're great to work with, and put a ton of effort into helping pull together this event and the event at Anne's home a year and a half ago. So really appreciate that. I'll introduce one other person on the call this morning, Jerry Knoyer. You might see his box up top. Jerry is part of our team. He is a fundraiser and is a shared position between the Washington chapter and the Alaska chapter. Alaska is it's a big state, but it's a small population, and our chapter is small for staff. So we really benefit a lot from sharing resources and sharing talented people like Jerry with some of our neighboring chapters. And Jerry's going to help us navigate through the presentation this morning. So what I want to talk mostly about today is Bristol Bay. I will talk a little bit about some of our other work at the end, and also during the question period, if you have questions about some of our other work around the state, in the Tongass and Southeast Alaska, in the Arctic, be happy to also address some of those questions. But today I'm going to talk about Bristol Bay, and it's hard to overstate the importance of a place like Bristol Bay. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to high school at East Brunswick, ran track there, and never thought much about Alaska as growing up. It was just a sort of a mythical place that existed somewhere far away, but not a place that I had ever been to or ever really had a plan to go to. But throughout my life, almost by chance, I ended up spending time in Alaska and getting to know the place. And then when the opportunity came up to move here professionally and work on Alaska resource issues, I jumped at the chance about 8 years ago. And Bristol Bay is within, as special as Alaska is, Bristol Bay is special in Alaska. We consider it the last stronghold for wild salmon in North America, if not the world. It's a place of incredible beauty and also incredible productivity of nature in an intact landscape, and a place where people have thrived and coexisted with that nature, that abundant nature, for literally thousands of years. And so we'll talk about that more today. And I'll also talk about some urgent threats facing this region and what we're doing to address those threats. And specifically, I'm going to talk about a large mine that has been proposed for the Bristol Bay region. I'm sure many of you have heard about it or read about it in the papers. It's called the Pebble Mine, and it would be one of the largest open pit copper and gold mines in the world, and it's being proposed to be built right at the headwaters of some of the most productive salmon streams literally in the world. So some ways that Alaska and particularly Bristol Bay are relevant, even all around the country, if not the world. If you like wild salmon, most likely those salmon came from Alaska. About 95% of our wild sockeye salmon is Alaskan in origin, and Bristol Bay produces about 50% of the world's wild sockeye salmon harvest every year. So one bay in Alaska, about half the world's commercial consumption. It's pretty amazing. And these aren't hatchery fish. These are wild fish that still spawn in their intact natural streams. Alaska is becoming more and more important, I think, as a stronghold for intact nature. Certainly in North America, if not globally. There's a lot of threats. Climate change is having a big impact in Alaska. We're really feeling it. It's visible for Alaskans, and we are concerned about the future of that. And because of things like climate change, we're especially concerned about protecting the most important habitat for fish and wildlife as a buffer against the potentially destabilizing effects of climate change in the future. For decades, over 3 decades, TNC has worked throughout the state to protect and restore Alaska's most critical fish and wildlife habitats. And in Bristol Bay, we've been working for over 2 decades, largely in a science role, and now increasingly engaging in policy and more economics, working with our most critical partners, the indigenous people who live in this region and have lived here for thousands of years. So I'd like to just give try to bring Alaska and Bristol Bay into your living rooms a little bit. If we were going to try to get a video to run, we'll see if it works. But if not, this is some aerial imagery that was taken by one of our trustees, Norm Van Vactor. He is the CEO of the Bristol Bay Economic Development Corporation, which is a fishing industry-based nonprofit in Bristol Bay. And he's also an amateur pilot. And so he put a GoPro on the wing of his small prop plane and flew around Bristol Bay, taking some photos, some imagery of this special place. As I mentioned, about half the world's wild sockeye salmon spawn in these rivers, like you see here in this picture. Last year, it was over 60 million fish, which is an incredible amount of productivity. And not only sockeye salmon, but all 5 species of Pacific salmon thrive here in these rivers. And as I mentioned also, it is that productivity scattered throughout this entire region that has sustained the indigenous cultures and peoples who've lived in this area for thousands of years, people who speak different languages, Yupik, Dena'ina, Alutiiq, 3 major language families, all are represented in the diverse peoples who live in this region. And they have been the stewards of this region for thousands of years and intend to be the stewards for thousands of years into the future. Last month, we were very fortunate. As you know, TNC has a new CEO, Jennifer Morris, and she hosted a live stream event on Facebook that she moderated. And I was part of a panel with Anissa Costa, who's the Director of Sustainability for Tiffany & Company. Tiffany has been a major opponent of the Pebble Mine as a consumer of gold, but as a consumer of sustainably sourced gold. They have taken a strong stand against the mine. And I was joined by Lindsay Leyland, who's the Deputy Director for United Tribes of Bristol Bay, representing all 31 tribes in the Bristol Bay region. And Lindsay will share a short clip here where she talks about the importance of salmon for the people who live in Bristol Bay.
It's often impossible to really find words that truly capture the meaning and the value of salmon to the people of Bristol Bay. And you know, they, from serving as a basic sustenance food source, right, to providing spiritual connection to the land, the waters, the environment, ancestral history, art, culture, education. The significance of salmon has no bounds here. You know, in a westernized world where we see salmon as a healthy protein or maybe a job source, which it also does provide for many Alaska Natives, but to reduce the importance of salmon to a monetary value or just a meal does not come close to reflecting or capturing the wholesome role of salmon to these indigenous populations. And you know, one way I've had salmon described to me by a tribal elder is that it's a lifeblood. Salmon and clean waters and clean lands are synonymous with life and with being and with culture.
Okay, great. And it was a real honor to participate in that event with Lindsay and with Anissa from Tiffany. And we had over 10,000 people view that event. So this is part of our strategy, is working with local partners to really build on TNC's large network to try to elevate local voices and literally get the word out about this special place and why it's so important. For those, I know some of you have been to Alaska and some of you have not. So I'll help orient a little bit on this map here. So this is the state. You can see if you were to overlay Alaska across the United States, the maps don't normally do justice to the sheer the vastness of Alaska. And the Bristol Bay region itself, in the southwest corner of the state, combined headwaters and the bay itself, the ocean portion of the bay, is about the size of Ohio. So it's a very large territory, completely intact, and that's one of the reasons why it's so productive and remains productive for salmon. The star that you see in the center of the map is the proposed Pebble Mine, right at the headwaters of 3 of the most productive salmon streams in Bristol Bay. So they're really then 3 of the most productive streams in the world. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about our strategy, and then get into a bit more depth into why the Pebble Mine is such a threat. But really our strategy in Bristol Bay is threefold. One, we want to deal with the imminent threat of the Pebble Mine itself. It gets a little complicated. The mine is proposed on lands that are owned by the state of Alaska. And the mineral itself is owned by the state and is leased to a private company. In this case, the Pebble Partnership, which is a Canadian junior mining company. The Pebble Mine is the only real asset that they own. And at this point, it's just a paper asset. And they're trying to get their permits to build the mine. And so there's a state nexus, and we are engaging with the state and state legislators to look for ways to stop the permitting of the mine. We're also engaging immediately with federal regulators, in this case, the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA, that have jurisdiction over the mine under the Federal Clean Water Act. And I'll get into more detail in a few minutes about the immediate strategy that we're pursuing around the federal permit. We also are engaging with our senior senator, Lisa Murkowski, to explore legislative pathways for permanently protecting this area. And it would most likely involve an exchange between the United States and federal assets or federal cash for the state's mineral interest in this place, and basically swap out that state interest and allow the mineral to remain in the ground. And the third part of our strategy is working very closely with our indigenous partners, looking for ways to invest in local communities, both their capacity to manage land and resources on the state and federal lands around those communities, as well as invest in their desires to create a sustainable economic future that is not dependent on a one-time extractive industry like mining, but can really benefit from the sustainable and productive nature that has been the underpinning of their economy for thousands of years. But in a global economy, thinking of ways that they can adapt that relationship with nature to have a productive economy for their future. One thing is clear: we are at a critical juncture with the Pebble Mine right now and their permitting process, and so we're really putting all our resources into trying to stop this current permit, because if we don't, this sustainable future will be greatly jeopardized. Okay, so we have a couple more photos here. So one of the things that makes TNC unique and really makes us a valued partner is we are a large organization. We're in all 50 states, and we have a well-developed bipartisan relationship that we've cultivated for years in Alaska and around the country that we think can be a real asset when pursuing federal legislation to try to protect Bristol Bay permanently. And that's one of the reasons that Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski has contacted the Nature Conservancy to see if we can help with her colleagues around the country to generate the kind of support that we would need to pass legislation to permanently protect Bristol Bay. So let me talk now, I'll shift gears a little bit and give a little more background on the mine itself and the current trajectory of the mine. So in July, the Army Corps of Engineers released a final environmental analysis indicating that they would permit the project. And then in September, after considerable pressure from a very diverse set of interest literally around the country, opposed to the mine, sportsmen, the sport fishing industry, commercial fishing, local communities, indigenous leaders, there was a lot of pressure to be more diligent, for the Corps to be more diligent in pursuing its responsibilities under the Clean Water Act. And so the Corps in September issued a follow-up letter to the Pebble Mine proponents, basically indicating that they were not so sure the mine could be permitted, and that in particular, the proponents would have to produce a more comprehensive mitigation plan for how they would intend to offset the unavoidable impacts of the mine. And it's a very high bar. Yesterday, the developers, the Pebble Mine proponents, submitted their compensatory mitigation plan to the Army Corps of Engineers. And by statute, the Corps is not required to make that public. But we are pushing very hard, us and our partners are pushing very hard for the Corps to disclose that so that we can look at what the Pebble proponents have proposed and analyze that and provide our interpretation of their plan, because we feel in all likelihood that plan will be inadequate, and we want to make sure that there's transparency and a real review of what's been submitted. And I say that because literally our decades of science in this region have demonstrated that given the scale of the proposal, of the proposed mine and the impacts associated with that, we do not see a way that this mine can be developed with the technologies being proposed at the scale that's being proposed in a way that would not permanently impact this fishery. And we want to make sure that the record clearly shows that. We are going to be asking our membership and our supporters to join us in calling the Army Corps and their members of Congress to be more transparent and to make sure that this project isn't pushed through in the next couple of months in a way that would seriously impact the future of this region. And we do have an action alert that's urging our membership to reach out to their legislators and urging our legislators to be clear in their voice about the need to protect this place. The Pebble Mine it's a current proposal. It's been working through the permitting process now for over a decade, but it will always be a threat. Even if this current iteration of the mine is stopped, it will be a threat as long as the mineral itself is open to development. And literally, the people who live in Bristol Bay have been fighting this mine for a generation. It's over 20 years. And that fight has really drawn resources away from all the other issues that these communities face. It's a remote region. The economics are challenging. And with COVID now, it's become even more challenging. These are the kinds of issues that people want to focus on in the region, but they've really not been able to because they've been fighting a defensive battle with this foreign-owned mining company for literally a generation. Let me talk a little bit more about the risks and what is at stake. Here's a photo of the wetland complex that is so essential to the productivity of this region. what we know is that mitigating the level of destruction that this mine would cause is simply not practical in this region. We would lose wetlands like these. These are salmon nurseries. They're very special places, and there's very few places like this left on the planet. Wild salmon used to thrive throughout Northern Europe, all through New England and the Northeast United States and the Eastern Seaboard of Canada, the Pacific Northwest, and in all those regions, we have largely lost those wild salmon runs. It's really only in Alaska and especially in Bristol Bay that we still have places like that. The mine, as proposed, would produce billions of gallons of toxic wastewater that would need to be stored and treated in perpetuity. These tailings, as they're known, these toxic tailings, would be stored behind earthen dams, and rely on a water treatment system at a scale and complexity that has never been attempted before in a region without a dedicated power source, with no road access, that is highly earthquake prone and flood prone. So a very risky situation with an unproven technology being proposed by a very undercapitalized foreign company. So it's a recipe for disaster. And we hired a team of hydrogeologists to do some modeling for us to look at what would happen if the earthen dam containing these toxic tailings were to be breached, and that the results would be catastrophic. We've modeled that the resulting outflow from a breach dam could travel as far as 200 miles downstream of the mine, all the clear out to Bristol Bay, and impact thousands of acres of habitat, critical habitat for all 5 species of wild salmon. And this is not an unreal scenario. In 2014, a similar project that had been built, it's the Mount Polley mine in British Columbia, smaller than the proposed Pebble Mine, but a similar technology. Their tailings dam failed, and it released 6.6 billion gallons of toxic mine waste into the Fraser River watershed, which is also an important salmon stream in British Columbia. And we do have, if we can get it to run, we have some footage of what that looked like when that dam blew out. So you can imagine if that were to happen here, literally the same kind of catastrophic event, how that would impact these very sensitive and fragile watersheds, these wetland and river complexes. So we are working very closely with our local, regional, and national partners to work diligently to stop the current permitting process and to permanently protect the region. I will add that, unfortunately, the Army Corps of Engineers has not done a very good job of consulting with local people, and particularly with local indigenous communities. This failure really overlooks not only the science, but tradition and culture, and the insights from those cultures, and raises a serious question of environmental injustice. Lindsay, who you saw speak, and her organization has testified in front of Congress. They've talked about the importance of this region for their livelihoods, their future, and to date, the Army Corps has largely turned a deaf ear to that. We'll turn to one more video now from one more of our partners. Her name is Alexandra Salmon. She's from the community of Igiagik, which is on the shore of Lake Iliamna, immediately downstream of where the proposed mine would be. And she's the president of the Igiagik Village Council. And we held a webinar earlier this summer where we presented a similar kind of presentation on the mine, and she participated in that. And this was a response to sort of the final question about the mine and her vision about what a sustainable future from her perspective looks like in this region.
Is there any way to develop the mine in a more environmentally acceptable way?
Going back to the hydrologic complexity of our watershed, I would absolutely say no, because short of gold panning, I can see everything else being so disruptive to our wetlands. And this is the last stronghold for wild salmon ecosystem in the planet. You don't mine and you don't disrupt when you're down to the last on planet Earth. So that would be my short answer. And there are, when we talk about Igiagik being a model community, 70 tribal members, 42 people hired in 2019 worked for the village, made a good living, 83% local hire. When I say these things can be done, they can be done. And Pebble has come to us, cannot believe that we will not accept a paycheck to allow all these things that they've offered. And I've said, what do you have to give us? $1 trillion? What will $1 trillion get us? We have the greatest quality of life. We're living it right now. We have food security, water security. We're one of the most resilient communities I've ever seen. We've diversified our economy. We work with our native corporation. We work with our tribe business. We own for-profit companies. We're doing business here and there. Like, it is possible. There is, and to look at a region who's historically in the commercial fishery is the answer, and then to turn over and say there's only going to be mining. It doesn't have to be boom or bust. We live happy, content lives here. And that's why I tell other communities, speak for yourself, because we're a shining star out there. And if we can make it happen here in Igiagik, it can happen anywhere. And to be able to self-determine what you want, the only issue is we're sitting here so vulnerable to these external economies that we have so carefully shielded ourselves from. And that's why we need to go to partners worldwide to help us with this, with what's happening.
Yeah, I think about the history of resource development in Alaska, and it's largely been boom and bust. And we've seen a legacy of large-scale landscape impacts in Alaska, just like in other parts of the country, but at an even greater scale because the resources are so big. So places like the Tongass National Forest, the North Slope of Alaska, where we've seen major resource development, the tendency has been extraction without reinvestment in the region, and a loss of productivity and a loss of nature over time. And so we feel like our path is clear in Bristol Bay. We are dedicated to fight the mine and to protect the region permanently, and to help communities like Alexana's to invest in their future and their economic future as well as the important cultural values that Alexana and others are working to protect into the future. We are very hopeful. As I mentioned, Alaska's senior senator has taken a formal stand against the mine. She is a Republican, and she's very, very influential in the Senate. And so we're very hopeful that with her leadership, we can get behind a permanent protection measure. We are also working very hard with the current administration to communicate the importance of not issuing a permit right now, given the sensitivity of the issue and the need to not base a permit decision on inadequate science and very poor consultation with indigenous people. And we are engaging with the transition team, communicating the need to think about protecting Bristol Bay as a priority for this incoming administration, And there have been public statements in opposition to the Pebble Mine. So we're very hopeful that if we can get through the next 70 days without a permit being issued, we can deal with that immediate threat of the permit and then work with our senior senator to put in place a long-term protection strategy. With that, I will stop there and turn over back to Carrie and take questions. But thank you again for allowing me to talk about the Bristol Bay and the Pebble Mine issue. We really do feel like Alaska is our last best chance to protect and conserve nature at a scale and a level of intactness that is unique and significant certainly for our country, if not for the globe. But thank you again, and look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Steve. First question is, how does the opening of the Tongass Wilderness affect you and your conservation efforts?
Oh, it's a great question. It's a complicated issue. We have been engaged in the Tongass, and for those who are not familiar with the Tongass, it is the coastal rainforest, temperate rainforest in Southeast Alaska. Also a very large geography, about 17 million acres of national forest. It was very heavily logged from about the World War II through the early 1990s. Extensive landscape impacts from that logging. President Clinton stopped that when he put in place a rulemaking with Forest Service to prevent any new road building in areas that had not yet been impacted by roads. That has held until just a couple of weeks ago. So nearly 30 years. And this administration issued a new rule that basically rolled back all of those protections. The incoming administration has made it clear that they intend to revisit that. And so we are very optimistic about engaging with the incoming administration to roll back the rollback, I guess you'd say, and put in place a new form of a new conservation overlay through a new federal rule for the Tongass. And one of the things that has really changed since the Clinton era is climate change and the importance of the Tongass as literally one of the most important sources of standing carbon in the United States, if not the planet. And so we're very excited about the possibility of incorporating climate change and carbon sequestration into the management of the Tongass National Forest, and the benefits that that can provide for local communities through things like carbon leasing and other activities to manage the forest for carbon and other ecosystem benefits rather than a one-time extraction of old growth timber. We did receive a grant yesterday from Jeff Bezos, a $20 million grant for our work in both the Tongass and coastal British Columbia. We call it the Emerald Edge. It's sort of one large rainforest ecosystem that extends from the Olympic Peninsula in Washington all through Southeast Alaska and British Columbia. And we specifically got funding to work on climate carbon science and protection of some of the most important old growth stands from a carbon perspective. So we're really excited about these opportunities. We want to continue to work on the science and also engage in policy to look for more permanent kinds of conservation protections.
We have a question from one of our Conservancy Council members, Barbie Bach, who used to work for the EPA on copper mine disasters in Region 8. And she's wondering, what does the US EPA say about the proposed mine?
That's a great question. I didn't want to get too far into the weeds of our strategy, but we do have a sort of a plan B, I guess. Even if a permit is issued by the Army Corps in this next 70 days, or if no permit is issued, the EPA under the Clean Water Act has a veto authority, a veto power, and they can more permanently restrict not only this Pebble Mine, but any future mine of a similar size and scale in this region. So we are very much urging the EPA. Now, we've been doing that under this administration. We will certainly continue that pressure under the new administration to veto this project, which we feel would accelerate the pressure for permanent legislative protection. So that will be very much our strategy in the coming months, is to really work with the EPA and the incoming EPA administrator to permanently protect this area.
Okay, can you tell us what are the rivers that are impacted by the Pebble Mine?
Yeah, the sort of the immediate downstream rivers is the Nushagak and the Mulchatna River watershed, which is a very large drainage that drains from the mine off to the sort of southwest. It's a critically important salmon stream. And then the current mine proposal is a 20-year mine. But there are indications from the company that their proposal is much bigger and that they would propose up to a 180-year mine. That's their ultimate vision, would be to develop the full mineral deposit. And at that scale, the footprint would extend into the adjacent watershed, which is Lake Iliamna and the Kwijak River system. And that river system, those two river systems combined, the Nushagak and the Kwijak, is about half of Bristol Bay sockeye salmon productivity. So about a quarter of the world's commercial salmon rely on those two drainages. I'll add also that Lake Iliamna is the largest freshwater lake in Alaska, and it's one of only two lakes in the world that support a resident freshwater harbor seal population, largely because of its intactness and its incredible salmon productivity. So it's a very, very special place. There are communities, indigenous communities around the lake that rely heavily on the clean water that Alexandra talked about. Her community is right on Lake Iliamna, and the importance of clean water and salmon. And if this mine were to be built and expanded on over decades, it would directly impact her village and her way of life.
Steve, you mentioned an action alert. I wonder if you can tell us a little more about what that is, how someone can participate, and in addition, what can we do besides contact Senator Murkowski?
Yeah, so we did put out an action alert earlier in the summer. I'm trying to remember, maybe Jerry, if you can track down the link for that, we can post that in the chat. We'll be putting up some additional action alerts. It's not only contacting Lisa Murkowski, but I think it's really important for individual members of Congress to hear from their constituents. And when legislation is introduced, hopefully at the beginning of the next Congress, January or February, Senator Murkowski is going to need support. She's going to need co-sponsors. She's going to need other senators to rally behind her lead. And so we'll be continuing to update our action alert and asking for people to work to reach out to their members of Congress in support of permanent protection. Right now, the pressure is really on the Army Corps of Engineers to not issue a permit. So we'll also be looking to put out sort of an action alert for folks to reach out directly to the Corps and ask them to hold off and not issue a permit right now.
How have you established rapport and trust with the local indigenous peoples? And are there any indigenous individuals on your staff or board?
Yeah, it's a decades-long process, working with indigenous leadership, developing those relationships, developing trust. And as I mentioned, we have worked in Bristol Bay for a couple of decades. We currently work both with regional organizations. Just last week, we issued a joint opinion piece in the Alaska paper, the Anchorage Daily News. We co-authored that with Lindsay's organization, United Tribes of Bristol Bay, the Bristol Bay Native Association, and the Bristol Bay Economic Development Corporation, which I mentioned Norm Van Vactor, who's the CEO of that, and also is one of our trustees on our board. He lives in Dillingham, and it's a local fisheries-based nonprofit corporation. And those are all regional organizations. So we are coordinating with regional organizations, other national organizations like Trout Unlimited, Natural Resource Defense Council. And then we're working on the ground, working at the village level. We're currently engaged in a lot of work with Alexana's community in Igiagig, and have sort of based on personal relationships that we're continuing to foster. And then we're looking to work with other communities, particularly around Lake Iliamna, and work with leadership there. So I've been reaching out to individual leaders in tribal governments, just sort of letting them know what our interests are, where we might have sort of a shared values and shared goals, and looking for ways that we can continue to partner on some of the issues that are most important for those communities, not only the Pebble Mine issue, but issues around commercial access to fisheries, expanding new economic opportunities like ecotourism and the like. So it's a slow process, but something that we're very committed to. We are hiring a Bristol Bay program lead, and that individual is going to be, waking up every day, reaching out to leaders from the region and continuing to foster those partnerships.
Well, it turns out that one of our guests here is a resident of Alaska, Doug Robbins. He put a comment in the chat about his concern over the Tongass and the exemption to the roadless rule. He also has a book recommendation, Tongass Odyssey by biologist John Schoen, a memoir of a career in the Tongass. We have another question. The Pebble permit process, as you mentioned, is moving along even as we speak. Can you share some more details on the plan they submitted to the Army Corps yesterday and what we can expect the next steps to be?
Well, it's a challenge, because the Corps is not required to release that plan publicly. But the requirement is that the company needs to offset the impacts of the proposed mine, the direct impacts, so the footprint of the mine, which is a loss of wetlands, a loss of streams, to sort of compensate that by protecting an equivalent, or protecting or restoring an equivalent value in that same watershed. Now, the tricky part is that watershed's completely intact. So there's nothing to restore. It's the only threat in that watershed is the Pebble Mine itself. So that's one of the things we want to look at is, are they proposing to offset their impacts by somehow lessening their potential development or something like that, which would not really be allowable under the rule. The other issue is that the watershed, about 95% of that watershed is owned by the state of Alaska. And so if they're going to propose permanently protecting some portion of that watershed, like creating a new park or state game refuge or something like that, that's going to require action of the state legislature. And if it's just based on a promise that the legislature will protect that area, that to us is totally unacceptable. It would have to be permanent protection, which requires an act of the legislature, and that's years in the making. And so that is not something that we feel is suitable at all, a suitable basis for issuing a permit. But if the Corps doesn't release the document, it's very hard to know what's been proposed. And I will say my experience in Alaska, having worked with the Army Corps and the Alaska District in particular, is that they are notoriously fickle. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they tried to issue a permit in the next, say, 60 days, even based on a very shoddy record and limited public disclosure. So we're pushing back on that.
sorry, I didn't unmute myself. What kind of financial support do we need in Bristol Bay now?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're hopeful that we can pivot from a defensive strategy to a proactive strategy. And a big part of that proactive strategy is permanent protection, which requires some kind of, most likely will require an exchange between the state of Alaska and the federal government. And so we are gearing up for effectively a legislative campaign on two fronts, federal and state. And in particular, the state campaign, we don't currently have the capacity to do that. So we are raising funds to be able to engage effectively in Juneau and to work with our legislature. We're very fortunate that the Speaker of the House in the State House, probably, we don't know yet completely the results of the election, but he was the Speaker in the last legislature. If his role continues, he's from Dillingham, from Bristol Bay, and is a proponent of protection. So we feel like we've got a very good ally in the state legislature. And so we're envisioning a very active state campaign. And we've sort of, sketched it out. And it's about $1 million a year to engage effectively at the state legislative level. And we're looking at a 3-year campaign. So that's our sort of immediate fundraising goal for that piece of the strategy. Is we're looking to raise around $3 million over 3 years to engage effectively in a state legislative campaign.
Okay, that's it for our questions. Please stay on, everybody, and visit with staff. Back to you, Steve.
Oh, okay. Yeah, again, I just want to thank you all so much for taking this time out. I know it's a faraway place, and for those who have been to Alaska, you know how special it is. But hopefully, for those who haven't been, maybe it will inspire you to want to come visit. Barbara and I have talked about helping to host a trip to Alaska for TNC supporters, and we would hope to be able to do that as soon as we can, as soon as it's safe. We would love to help set up that kind of a trip. I think whenever you go to the grocery store now and you see wild Alaska salmon, it's probably from Bristol Bay, and so hopefully that connection will be that'll be a meaningful connection for you. And I'll just sort of end where I started. As someone who grew up in New Jersey, didn't know much about Alaska, didn't think much about it. It's a place that has really captivated my heart. Having now lived there, both my sons are born here in Alaska. It's a special place, and I would encourage you all to come. I'm really excited that the Nature Conservancy, as an organization, with our CEO leading the way, is committed to protecting places like Bristol Bay, and it's a real honor to be able to work in this capacity for TNC. It's an honor to be able to speak with you today. Again, appreciate you all taking the time, and look forward to seeing you all here in Alaska in person when we can. So thank you again. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Barbara. Really appreciate all your support.
So, Steve, I just want to say a very big thank you from us for your taking the time to educate us a little bit about this imminent hazard in front of us. And the Nature Conservancy, together, we're working as hard as we can to try and fight this. We know that it's never going to be a good thing. So we're with you. And I am looking forward to COVID disappearing. So maybe someday we'll be able to travel again. And I've been to Alaska, loved it, and look forward to coming back and seeing some of these places in person. So thank you again. We really appreciate everything you're doing. And if there's anything more we can do, or if others have questions for you, we're happy to put them in contact with you directly. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Um,
And thank you,
and-
Barbara. You've been a great supporter of our chapter. Really appreciate it.
One
Thank you for your leadership.
conservancy, we're all
Yes.
together.
Thank you.
So I wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming today. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a really interesting topic. And so thank you for taking your time to listen. And I want to invite you for our next event coming up in a couple of weeks on December 9th. We're having another of our Conservation Connection series, and it's entitled The Appalachian Super Range. And it's all about our fabulous Appalachian Mountains that run from Georgia all the way up through Maine, and the incredible, what we like to call climate highway it is. It's just one of those places where there's a lot of resilience. And so protecting that mountain range is really important. So you'll hear a lot about that in a couple of weeks. So I invite you all to join us for that. And thank you again for coming today, and hope you enjoyed it. So take care, everybody. Stay safe and be well.
So good to see everybody.
That's
Great to see you
too,
all.
Tony. Tony, be well. How are you?
Thank you again, Anne. Really
Oh, you're
appreciate it.
very welcome. I've
Thank
never
you for all your
so
support.
much for doing
Thank you,
so.
Ann. We appreciate all of your support, and I know Alaska appreciates your support.
We're
Thank you
gonna
so
make
much.
that trip happen yet, Anne.
What?
We are.
We're gonna make that trip happen.
I hope so. I'll be there.
Great.
I'm
Can't
looking
wait.
forward to it.
We'll go to Igiugig.
Thank you, Barbara,
So cool.
Anna, who is invisible.
Yeah, Anna, God, put your camera on. I want to see what you look like.
Don't know
these
what
days.
happened, but it was a very, very interesting and worthwhile talk, and let's hope the Pebble Mine never gets done.
Yeah, well, that's all of our
Thank you.
hopes. So we're all working on it, but you know, it takes more than a village. These are big things. And the thing is that once it happens, there's no going back. So we need to figure out how to prevent it from happening in the first place. So thank you. Good hearing from you, Anna. And Doug, nice meeting you, Alaska resident, huh? I love it. These TNC people are everywhere.
Thank you.
Yeah. Doug, please feel free to reach out. It'd be great to meet here in Anchorage.
Yeah, I will as soon as we're done here. And thank you
Great.
to Barbie Bach for inviting us to participate.
Thank
Barbie
you
and
for
I are
joining.
classmates.
Barbie, thank
So
you so
cool.
much for all of your experience in the EPA and mining. I'm sure you have a lot more things you could tell Steve about.
Oh, this is just, wow, what an issue. What an issue. But I'm just curious, can I ask you why isn't Freedom of Information Act able to release the Army Corps of Engineers report?
I suspect it will. It's just, the time it takes for those to wind through the process. I mean, they could issue a permit at any time. And so that's got us really nervous right now.
Barbie,
Luckily there is oh, I'm sorry.
But you used to work for them or EPA, so you know a lot about this. Maybe you can give us some hints on what else we can do to get to them, or are you as frustrated as we are in trying to get to them?
The big copper mining corporations are really hard to fight, but you're starting at a really good point, before it's permitted. So, but once they're in the ground, it's just an environmental disaster.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. When I was at BLM here in Alaska, I worked on a project to reclaim an old mercury cinnabar mine in the Yukon-Kuskokwim drainage. And it was so costly and difficult because these are remote regions. It's just really hard it's hard. And these are Superfund sites. I mean, having grown up in New Jersey where there were quite a few Superfund sites, but at least you could drive to those, and there's electricity in these remote locations. To clean up a mess is really hard and costly.
And do you think there's anything that can be done about the proposed leasing on Anmore?
Oh, that's another. I'm TNC, we have not engaged directly in the Arctic Refuge a whole lot in the past. But the way that has been done has been quite troubling. I mean, the law that opened that area up for leasing is fairly clear, but it still leaves a lot of discretion. And the way that's been implemented is concerning, particularly sort of recognition of climate change and the importance of factoring in climate change into that leasing decision. And it's polar bear habitat. And we're very concerned that, and that is a threatened species. That population is threatened. We're very concerned.
Got my
with
polar bear shirt on.
Yeah, it's polar bears are in trouble. And, developing that area could, even just the proposed seismic exploration this winter, it's denning habitat. I mean, it could be a real disaster. So we're trying to see how we can engage. But there are also a lot of organizations that have a much more, they're much more vocal on that issue. And so they're continuing to kind of push publicly. We're seeing what we might be able to do to help sort of behind the scenes. But I'm a little bit optimistic in that, they did announce the call for nominations today for leasing, but these processes take time, even if they're on a fast track. And, I did mention this too. I was interviewed just last week by a local reporter. The Bureau of Land Management is the permitting agency. They're the federal lease, BLM does all federal onshore leasing. And this administration has never nominated a permanent BLM director. So it's an acting director, and a judge in Montana recently ruled that any decisions made by under this BLM director are invalid because he's exceeded his legal authority. So there's that legal jeopardy question. And then they also moved the BLM headquarters out of Washington, D.C. to Grand Junction, Colorado. And so they lost the kind of leadership that you need in Washington to make things happen quickly. So in a ironic twist, they're going to try, really want to get leases issued before January 20th, but they may not have the ability to do it. So that's my hope, at least. But it's a complicated issue. And the Pebble Mine, the majority of Alaskans oppose it, but the majority of Alaskans favor drilling in the Arctic Refuge. So the politics are trickier.
Yep. Okay, well, again, thank you, Steve. So appreciate your time. And like I said, if anybody has any more questions, feel free to reach out to me or Lisa or anybody, and we'll try and connect you with the right people. All right, well, take care,
See
folks.
you next time, everybody.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate all your time. It's great to see you.
Thanks again, Steve.
Take care.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jerry.
And be
Bye-bye.
well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Yes, be safe.